Needham Unite Against Working Group. Thank you, Katie. So this is a meeting of Nuwari, and I'm grateful to everybody for coming tonight to be here to have a discussion about where are we now. And so we thought that we would start with, Kate, I'm looking, we didn't do the glossary, right?
Liz has been working on it, right, Liz, the glossary?
Yes, I didn't get as far as I would have hoped. I've been trying to simplify some of the language, but I need an extension.
I need an extension. So one of our goals was to have a glossary that we'd be able to give to everybody so they would have common words, common definitions. We'd have a place where everyone could go to. So we are hoping that that can be one of the pieces that comes from this group for going forward. And I think Liz's goal was to take, we had gathered terms from a variety of sources and put them sort of consolidated, but then we felt it needed some putting in Needham English so that it would be clear to everybody what we intended. All right, Kate, do we want to talk about the staff DEI efforts with you needing to leave?
I think Katie,
how do you want to do that?
Katie can handle a lot of it.
Okay.
And then, I just wanted to remind you that I did include the list of recommendations that this week, and I thought that might be helpful to walk through as part of reviewing it, Judge.
Yes,
So I'll run
Okay.
downstairs. If Katie, you can do the DEI.
Yeah, sure.
Katie. So people will remember that we had talked about going out to boards and committees, and then we decided that we were going to do staff work first, and then we'll go back to re-engage with boards and committees. So Katie, if you want to update us with how we're coming with staff now that we finally identified some resources to work with us.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I'll start with the resources, which was, we got a $50,000 earmark in the state FY22 budget for DEI work. And that really enabled us to do much of what I'll give you an update on, which was wonderful. Instead of having to wait a year, because town meeting did approve funding for 23, but we would have been a year behind, kind of been being able to fund some of this work. So the first bucket is really training.
And let me just say, when we say we got an earmark, that means that we worked with our legislators. So Denise Garlick, Becca Roush, to make that happen. So we're grateful to them for saying, yep, I'm willing to fund this for Nina.
Yeah, absolutely. So staff training, this is not exhaustive, but just high points. We wanted to offer something to all staff, every rank, every level. So we've done two, actually the second session's tomorrow, but same session, but an active bystander training to equip staff for how they could stand up in any situation if they felt like an intervention was needed, or to see if somebody wanted an intervention on their behalf. So those were by Zoom, and we really encouraged even our field staff, for staff to be able to set up a room like this so that the staff could all come in, because of course we have a lot of staff that aren't sitting at desks all day on laptops. So that was one initiative. We hired William James College to do an in-depth, actually 5-session training series for our leadership team. So for us, it's all of our department directors and kind of the number 2 in each department. So that's everyone: police, fire, DPW, park and rec, myself, Kate, Dave, every department you can think of. It's the top 2 in each department. We just had our first session on Friday, and it was wonderful, really well received. They didn't get through all the content because people were talking so much, which I loved. So we are going to continue that session, the next 4 parts of that training, starting back up in the fall when we don't lose so many people to vacations. So that's training. The HR department has done a huge concerted effort on recruitment and where to post applications to broaden the applicant pool. We implemented a new software tracking system for our hiring process. It lets us blind personally identifiable information when you first get the resumes. So you wouldn't see, if somebody had where they're from, or if they had a sorority, or things that we know kind of can trigger some implicit bias if you feel an affinity to somebody, or you make an assumption about their identity based on the information in their resume. So we've implemented that. They also, with the earmark funding, we got a subscription to diversityjobs.com, which opens up a whole world of job posting sites where we don't have to pay per posting because we were able to fund an annual subscription. So we're going to take this year to see what do we think that got us. There's an analytics component of it, so we can see if it helped expand our pool. The last thing I think is worth highlighting is supporting our existing BIPOC staff. We had launched in 2020 our first employee resource group called Stronger Together. And so we have actually just re-engaged Rachel Glisper, who was our previous HR director, to support us on contract to really be able to commit the capacity to that group to get them through next year and have them decide what do they want to be, what is the group, how do they want to function, what supports do they need. And so HR needed the bandwidth help, and so we asked Rachel to help with that. So those are the staff DEI things that are top of mind for me right now.
Questions here, Mike? What metrics are you looking, particularly when we jump back to training, right? How are you looking at what's most effective for the staff? And more importantly, what's not working and how you can adjust it perhaps as you look at the following year for funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the leadership trainings, the first session was really starting at the basics, like foundational, like what's race equity? Why are we talking about this? Like the shared language conversation that this group has had. And our goal over the course of that series with the trainers is to equip our managers to identify every department manager has to have a DEI goal for FY23. So what the trainings are going to support them to do is identify what is that goal for them. And so it's going to look different in every department in a good way. And so we heard a lot of feedback from staff that are like, we want to do this. We just don't know how. Like, how do you make this actionable? How do you bake it into your everyday work or policy review or, program implementation? So the trainings are focused on that. And so how we measure it is a good question. I mean, I think because we have goals in all of the managers' performance evaluations, it's a very concrete checkpoint. And I'd say our department managers are a really vocal group. So we tend to hear a lot, and that's really helpful for us. It is tougher to get kind of measurable data from trainings more broadly. So for the active bystander Zoom training, I wouldn't say there's a concrete metric. We tend to just check in with folks. What do you think? Do they feel useful?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And as far as the check-in that you have with the folks, I guess what is the percentage of people who are actually taking and doing that as opposed to who's still getting ready to do it?
Leadership meeting trainings are largely mandatory, except if somebody has a family emergency or vacation or something.
Yeah, so I'm saying, what's the makeup policy?
Oh, what's the makeup
Yeah, if
policy?
they're missing, then how are they getting it?
How are we bringing them back up to speed?
What is the?
So from the session on Friday, we have the slide deck and the notes, but I think we'll be talking to the trainers that we hired. I think at the next session, we'll have to do some synthesis of the prior session.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to be able to offer
Maybe.
a whole repeat.
Right, not a whole training, but I just
Yeah.
want to know, so say you can't get the trainers to come back, someone missed that meeting, or we're done, we're at the last one, somebody missed that last one. Who's taken upon themselves to help educate or train that staff that was not able to?
Yeah.
Like, where does that?
All
on
of the
Zoom?
department-
Is it on Zoom or is it
No,
live?
all in person.
Oh,
That was in
okay.
person.
So it's a recording.
And that was a considered choice
Got it.
for
Okay.
Kate.
Was it like a
This is
vulnerability?
discussion based.
Okay,
Yeah, just to, connect. And all of those department managers ultimately report up to Kate, myself, and Dave Davison. So really, it's our responsibility to check in and see who missed it and get them up to speed for the next session.
okay. And I think that should probably be in the measurables if there's staff that that haven't done it. And there's a time, if that checkup happens and they still haven't done it by the time they check in with you, then we drop the ball somewhere with getting them up to speed. So I feel like that should be baked into that process or that tangible, list of things that they completed this fully.
Yep.
Or they missed 3 meetings, because who knows? Could be anything,
Mhm.
but I think that's
That's a
really
good point.
important.
Katie, are you thinking you're going to do some of the goal setting with managers as a group, or will they all do it individually? I'm wondering if it will have maybe some of the benefit that we've talked about potentially with bringing committee chairs together and getting to hear how other people are thinking about it and how they're describing what the goals might be, so they could think about what that means in their area.
Yeah, so my hope is at a future training that they're talking about it amongst themselves, so that, you know, if you're DPW, maybe you can bounce an idea off of the library
Yeah.
and think about, because somebody, just knowing our staff, some people are thinking about measurement, other people are thinking about policy review, other people are thinking about, you know,
Right.
or do we even know the vulnerable population or the disproportionate population, and how do we identify it? So I hear this percolating up, so we hope at those leadership meetings that they're talking to each other, and it might help them solidify for themselves.
This,
I'm just wondering if you considered doing even just a very short pre and post survey to see if either attitudes or comfort or knowledge of these subjects has shifted over time. And you can do a pre and then an immediate post, and then one that's a little bit later on to see if that feeling of comfort or those abilities for maybe having difficult conversations, see if those things have persisted or fallen away. So just a thought.
any other questions?
It sounds really fantastic.
We
Thank you.
got a good team.
Actually, I have a question. So that's just for staff, but not necessarily for boards.
Right, it's just stuff.
So we'll come back and we'll talk about boards. We have a recommendation that's on the table, so we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so progress to be continued ongoing. Yeah, all right. The review of the committee charge was the next thing we had on our agenda for this evening. So our first matter was to articulate a recommended vision for racial equity in Needham and guiding principles. So that was something that we worked long and hard on, and that I continue to pull up at various times, and I know other people here do as well. The second item was establishing protocols and practices for getting community feedback with a specific focus on engaging Black, Indigenous, and people of color and others who have been marginalized due to their race or ethnicity. Strategies should be identified to keep Needham's racial equity work informed by BIPOC input, but owned by town leadership and the broader community. So I don't know where we really stand here. I would say that we don't have a firm set of protocols and practices. I do think that I see more consistent work in increasing areas that are thinking about that. I think our work with the rapid response team is another angle for having a way to go there. And then I know that farther down, we have this question of the complaint process. So, I mean, I think there's an increasing number of routes for somebody to provide feedback. But I know that we haven't formalized it with something on the website, for example, or, you know, where does somebody go if they have a comment? What do people think about this, where we are and where we aren't?
I can actually say something about the affordable housing or the housing master plan group. We did Cindy has been amazing, and she's been trying to reach out to different groups. But when we did a survey, it was like, 90% or something, 89% white and over 60, over 50 or 65. And so I think we should make a concerted effort of figuring out how to engage, different, the gender, different age groups and ethnicities and races. And it's not going to be via survey because it doesn't work. It hasn't worked. We tried. So one of the things I'm doing a master plan for UMass Boston right now. One of the things that we did is we set up in a place where all the students would go by and all the staff would go by in the student center, boards literally with little Post-its saying, what do you feel about this? And I would say we got such an immense amount of information that we did a survey, it was like 10 things that we were doing, but that one really works. So if there's something happening in the center of town at any point, or something where people, or even like in a place where we can get people to participate, even like at schools or something, where it's in person with a Post-it and that it's easy and that it looks fun, kind of.
Or the
You get,
carnival in July. I feel like
So-
possibly it's a place that's something like that.
where?
The carnival.
Or even like where they, Dunkin' Donuts, I don't know if I'm Dunkin' Donuts, like have people, or even go to the bank, right? Or where the kids don't go to the bank, but other people do, right? All different ages. It's targeting something very specific where they feel like they're, again, empowerment of being able to make an impact versus a survey where they're just lost and most people don't have time and different generations don't like surveys.
So we might have an opportunity to do something like that at the street fair, right? If we planned it, we could think about what the question would be and how we could collect feedback. That's kind of a large.
I can show you what we
community
did,
event.
just to say, what do you like about the campus? What don't you like about, like different things. It
Right.
might have been an equity board and everything. It was super, super easy. And the impact of site, the 4th of July is another one.
So the challenge of 4th of July is it's not just Needham people. It's so many people from outside of Needham. I mean, we could
Maybe you can ask. are you
think
from
about what the
Needham?
question is there, but
You can ask if
it's
they're Needham
definitely
residents.
broader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or would you like to be a Needham resident?
And if so, let's talk about these things.
You're right.
But I'm thinking that you want to put it, I think you want to make sure that you're gathering the people who you're trying to draw from, right? My concern about the street fair is not the same groups of people are going to be coming, I'm thinking about, people may be more likely to do that if it's outside of CVS or Walgreens.
Trader
for
Joe's.
example, Or Trader Joe's.
That has international food or
Oh.
someplace where,
But where people from all walks of life and stages of life will be going and will take the time. to do it. Liz,
I agree, and we've been discussing this from the educational perspective too. One thought that we've had is, not just staying in our own space and asking people to provide feedback to us, but I know this is challenging, but going out into the community and trying to solicit feedback from various groups who we may not typically hear from. So, going to the schools is that's a great idea, or going to the Linden Street units, that's elderly housing, right? And that way we're actively seeking those people who we don't typically hear from, because I think the people who feel comfortable answering a survey are the same people who feel comfortable coming onto a Zoom and making a public comment, who will write an email. The other thought I had was just in terms of the kinds of communication that the town has with the community. I think we often tend to just do emails or newsletters and these sort of very traditional types of communication, and that we probably, in general, I'm not saying it's our job as this committee, but need to start thinking about broader and different, more modern ways of communicating.
When you say that, what are you thinking of?
I actually just read an article on this, but it was specific to schools. It was, something along the lines of schools are using, newsletters and websites to communicate, and parents don't ever go, right? They don't want these. So I was talking to someone today who has 2 young children in Southern California, and she has an app. And this is a school-specific app, but all of the information she needs from for her daughters, including lunch menus, outreach from the teacher, photos, hours of school and half days, everything is located on an app. So something like that, I'm going to guess probably also exists at a municipal level. That is a whole, another conversation of who would organize that, but moving into or exploring some of those kinds of options might make sense at some point.
Is that Facebook? I mean, I honestly feel like if you had, a Facebook page that was specifically geared towards the populations we're looking for, monitored, obviously, people would leave comments, which are monitored, and, people would have to you'd have to prove them with their residence and so on and so forth. At least that way you can at least start getting an idea of who in the community wants to be more involved, who in the community exists, period, because we don't know a lot of people, BIPOC folks who exist in Needham. But I just feel like everyone's on their computer. I don't know, anyone does TikToks.
I was gonna say, I was waiting.
Wait,
I'm
there's
telling you,
people in there
I
too.
thought you-
because I do think that's part of it. but-
That's exactly what I thought.
Never suggesting that anybody do a TikTok.
Yeah.
Well, it's
TikTok,
coming.
I think it's
Anything I
huge.
suggest, I
It's
have to be
coming,
willing to
yeah.
do myself, so TikTok's out of the
But-
question.
But you know what, the Latina group in Needham that I'm part of,
Mhm.
right? I gave it, Cindy Roy Gonzalez, right? She speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let her in
What do you mean? Who-
because
who
I
would
was
let her in?
saying you should send it to the Latina group. There's this group, there's that group. She said they wouldn't let
What-
me
what
in.
would they let
They
her
said
in?
that a reason.
Who's
that
there?
I don't know, whoever's the gatekeeper of that group.
Yeah, I mean, there's private groups, but if you do it as a Needham sponsored.
But it's,
group-
but even so, the fact that Cindy is Latinx and they wouldn't let her in,
That's different.
there's a sign there that like people are afraid that if they're related to the town of Needham, they might not be able to speak as freely. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting because I was trying to connect her to other groups.
Yeah.
I'll also just add that I think Facebook is where a lot of people in Needham are.
Yes.
Missing, there are a number of people who don't use Facebook at all. And so that's not to say we shouldn't do Facebook, but we should have diversity of communications or outreach that don't rely only on technology.
But I have to say that the Facebook is only a certain generation. Like my kids would never go on Facebook and
Right.
probably no one under 40 would go on Facebook. So they go on Snapchat or they go, but that's a different, so, and there's Instagram. TikTok. So we're gonna have to dance our way through.
I see them dancing at the dump.
Is that coming out of that?
I think so.
I am so sorry.
No.
No.
Sounds like maybe that speaker.
It's not
I feel
mine.
like it's over there.
Is it that?
Yeah, it sounds like some kind of speaker or something is coming from.
Feedback.
No, it's definitely not.
It just started. and I-
Underneath?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything underneath.
No, it's not underneath, it's up here. No, it's, but it sounds like it's,
Well, you just did something and it got quieter for a second.
There's no.
well, but
Is it the camera?
We can probably just live with it, I guess.
Is it the camera?
Did someone actually, I don't want to lean over you,
That's
did someone
good.
actually just hold it to see the size?
Who's ever
it's
watching,
not bad.
apologize, trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
it's like in this area over here.
Yeah.
Don't blame us on us, no.
Because like Katie's still here.
Well, this little right triangle over here.
I got a little lower.
I'm gonna return this.
It got a little lower when Katie stood.
Right.
This is way more fun watching you guys. do this. Good help.
I don't know what it is.
What
I
about
don't even know where
the key?
Oh, there it is. It's on.
Wow.
It's
the
key.
Does that mean someone's?
Oh,
No, your battery's dying, probably. Is that what it is?
Is that a tile?
It's a tile,
Oh, so maybe the tile.
but I don't know whether it's, I think it's my key.
You
Yeah.
can put that in
It is.
another room if you want, keys.
Put it in the other room.
We should get rid of it. Oh, it's
Or
definitely
sit
that.
on it.
My keys.
Yeah, that's it, right? Exactly.
I like the wiggle
We're
wiggle
definitely ready for
show.
TikTok.
There you go, yeah.
I think in
But
general.
I think in general, social media, like, I don't think it necessarily, if you had someone who's a social media guru, then you do all of them somehow, Twitter, you know what I mean? Because you can post on one and, but
And they go on all
they
the
go on all of them,
platforms,
but
yeah.
like, that would not be me,
Well, so I do think that this question of how, we have a general question that we'll get to that's on the satisfaction survey for citizens. But I mean, figuring out what these questions are for getting feedback. I mean, maybe the piece from this group is this something we want to consciously think about twice a year, 3 times a year, so that we would have a question. Then once you have a question, you can figure out where you're going to go ask about it. So I sort of feel like we need to figure out how we would break down what our expectations might be to get some level of feedback.
Well, it's the questions, and also we have a segment of our population that feels kind of that it doesn't have anything to contribute or to get involved with the rest of the town. They, they just like live in the periphery, either because, they don't feel welcome or they feel that, there's no connection. And reaching out to them itself, that act is a welcoming and an empowering and encouraging act. So however way we do it, I think just the fact that we're doing it is going to have a positive effect as well.
I do have the questions if you wanted to know what those were that we asked on the satisfaction survey. Please rate the job you feel the Needham community does at each of the following: making all residents feel welcome, attracting people from diverse backgrounds, valuing and respecting residents from diverse backgrounds, and taking care of vulnerable residents, which is a separate elderly, disabled, homeless, etc. So that was one of the organizing principles. So this is a survey that is statistically valid and goes to several thousand people, and we got, I think, 600 responses, so we did pretty well. So we'll be presenting these in June. I haven't seen it yet, but we'll be presenting them in July. So it was sort of a baseline data as to, do people feel that, how do people feel that Needham is doing? Not necessarily whether it's true, but it'll be an interesting question.
Was it mailed out?
It was mailed out as a paper document, and that is the bulk of the work. But then it was pushed out as a survey through our newsletter and through all of our social media, and other people have taken it that way. But that is like sort of extra information. So we'll see, and you can tell which one is which.
You can't do it during voting, can you?
The survey?
Or just have like something like the Post-its near, can you or you
This-
can't?
Yeah, you probably could, because
what
as long
we
as it
did.
doesn't ask anything about candidates or political issue that's on the ballot, I mean, that's really the thing that can't be. But it could be, like in the hall of a polling place or something like that, that could be a place.
I just feel like
What do
everyone, a lot of people go, especially I think this
This November will be a
November,
big
a lot of
one.
people will vote.
Yeah.
That'd be something
Could
that,
it also be sent out with the census?
I don't think we can add, well, I don't know.
All these,
the-
the only thing I know you can't do is the tax bill. The census is possible. Water bills are possible. It's just, many people don't get their water bills, they don't.
A lot of people get them electronically,
Yeah.
so.
I think we have the questions. It's just about more going that non-traditional route
Sure.
to reach people that you may not have. And
Yeah.
maybe it is somebody standing outside of a Trader Joe's, and I don't have an issue of asking both Needham residents and non-residents, because I think if we think about where we want to be and why people come to Needham and why people don't,
Yeah.
if you open up that poll, you probably get a little bit more information. But, I think you've got to be a little bit more than, let's do it the traditional way. Let's just go out to where the people are.
Right,
Hey, almost if you're having one of those environmental surveys or something where people come up to you at the entrance of the supermarket and you're asked like 4 or 5 questions. And then that individual that's taking the question can get some demographic information just by, either asking or, visually looking at someone.
I also think it makes sense to try to use our town meeting members to reach out.
But I think, sorry.
I'm from first grade teaching for so long.
of course, they have. It's a good thing. It's
It is a
okay.
good thing. I just jumped in, sorry.
I was just thinking focus groups, I was thinking town meeting members, but I mean, again, having an opportunity to take those questions and hear with some depth how people in different parts of town feel about it.
Well, and my sense is to, Icon and Chinese Friends of Needham, Chinese Families of Needham, that they would both be open to having us come with some questions to one of their meetings or events as well.
I think to your point earlier, Marianne, about the Resilience Network kind of doorway for people to come in with complaints, and also with the Human Rights Committee complaint process, that those might give us 2 very concrete examples that we could share with some of the more culturally sensitive, centered groups around town, that maybe the action step for us would be to, partner with either members of the Human Rights Committee or the network to go to some of those different places before those processes really launch, to get feedback directly from some of those organizations to see, if there are some blind spots that are there in terms of access issues, of what might make somebody come forward to the network as opposed to the Human Rights Committee, or other things that we could implement in each of those processes that might make it more welcoming for people to come in. And like, I think like that, the questions, how welcoming is Needham? Do you think it's welcoming? I think it's interesting information, but I think it's hard to like use that information to do something that's like clearly actionable. Whereas I think that using these two processes that we're setting up as kind of the doorways for people to come to the town and say what's going on in their lives, to give feedback about something that's happening, that those give us very concrete ways to talk with people about what accessing the town to make these kind of comments and complaints about, or maybe there aren't no complaints. Maybe there's somebody who wants to say something really good about something that's happened. That would be useful feedback for us to have, both for the network to use in implementing their process, the Human Rights Committee to use in implementing their process, but also to have Nuwari be part of that, since we have kind of a broader perspective hanging over both of those.
I think it would be really useful to ask different groups what welcoming means to them. I mean, being on a board or committee may not be some person's idea of welcoming, but something else might be.
And are we able to send out materials specifically to BIPOC community from the town, like addresses and things like that, people that have identified themselves in that community? Is that something that is not allowed? I'm just asking out loud.
I just don't think we have a
I just don't
list,
think we have
right?
the data.
Well,
I don't know.
I think
We
when I
could-
ran from Vote Builder that I have, we have that data and then some, with, I think phone numbers and addresses and things, people from the BIPOC community, residents that identify themselves as I believe that list is still, we're able to use, but I obviously want to make sure it's something we can do, but I feel like to get in their homes, like send something to the homes of some kind of messaging or something like that, with like asking, I don't know how to phrase it the right way, or I can't think of like for as feedback, or, maybe some of these questions in there, but you don't want to come off a certain way, but we kind of do, because we want to know what people are feeling and how their experience has been in Needham, whether they've been here 30 years or whether they've been here 3 months.
It might be a way to
So-
invite people to a focus group for sure.
Invite people in. Or
Yeah,
to
something
see.
like a town.
Legally, there's no reason why we can't use that via a mailing.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I was saying.
Mailings are permitted,
Yeah, to their homes, like mailing
because then they make the decision about whether they're gonna interact with
or
it.
not.
So it puts the choice in their hands, but we could certainly do that.
Okay.
Jen, I think as I think about these questions on the citizen survey are directional in nature. So they're not really intended to be action, but over time, they tell us how we're doing. So our goal this year was to kind of get a baseline. And then hopefully when we do this again 3 years from now, we'll be in a different place when we might see some movement there. That would be our wish.
So I think we need to do it in different layers. So one of the things that was really eye-opening to me for again, the housing group, because we've been having all these meetings and trying to get a lot of representation. So we separated into 3 subgroups: the preservation of housing, zoning, and then capacity. And I was part of the capacity group, bringing in like the Nuwari principles and doing all of that. And so it was Michael O'Brien, and then it was from FinCom, Carol Fischetti. And so when we presented it, so we presented different pieces of capacity, like what's the capacity of the schools, what's the capacity of traffic, what's what do we need to do? Like, what are the recommendations for things that we need in town to be able to determine these things? One of the things that I brought up was something that Marianne had shared about the 2010 versus 2020 of ethnicity, race, ethnicity, and all. And so one of the things when we were talking about it, people were saying, well, it was like, 28,000 white, and it was like 465 black, right? And so it was double what it was 10 years ago. So people were looking at it with a different lens. They were saying, well, it doubled. And I'm like, but if you're the 452 and there's 28,000 people over here, don't you think that you're still in the minority? And isn't that a problem, right?
Right.
So I think
Right.
that there needs to be this piece of education for people to look at things with different lenses. But I think that for the majority to speak is a lot easier than the minority. And I think for the minority groups, like let's say for the Latinx women, for me to go in and talk to them in a candid way, in an authentic way, is very different than having Marianne and I go together. And so I think that we need to have, we can get feedback from people, but the true feedback is going to come when they can like let their hair loose and just say, look, this is how I felt when my kids were in elementary school, and this is how I felt when they were in high school, because I can say that, right? I had a completely different experience on both ends. And so getting that feedback, I think, is more important than globally just saying, do you feel welcome here or not? But it's also important for people that are feeling threatened, which is the majority. And having someone go in and say, what do you think it's a problem? And if not, and do you feel uncomfortable about it? Or because that also, it has to work from every different angle.
I think that gets back to, Marcus, if your list could be used to do an invitation to a focus group, then you think about what are the conditions in that focus group that people will be comfortable there. How do we set up
Who's
so
in the
that
room? Like,
for
it's from
success,
our
who's in the
side,
room?
like from-
Yeah.
From the town or from our
Mhm.
committee.
And do you want it to be confidential? Do you want it to be so that people don't feel like they're going to be uncomfortable giving candid information, which is what we need?
And would those focus groups have to be public or no?
They don't have to be. Because I do think if they were public, it would be hard.
Yeah.
Right? That's a really difficult spot to put people in, but they don't have to be.
I feel like the people in that focus group will have the conversations and they determine what they want reported out. I feel like that could be a determination that the group can collectively think
Decide.
about and decide if this is what we're comfortable with sharing, this is what stays within these four walls of the screen, or wherever this focus group might occur.
Kind of a kitchen cabinet thing. I had that at the BSA. I had a group of people that were like, I don't want to do any work on this. I'm so sick of talking about it, but I'll tell you if you want to do something about it. And that's kind of what we need, is kind of a kitchen cabinet from every angle.
But there'll also be some people that want to see action based upon what they talk about, right? So I think part of it is building their trust to be able to give you that feedback. The other part is being able to take that feedback and assemble it into something that you can mobilize around. And then the only way to get them to participate again is to be able to have some success come out of it. So I think we've got to be very careful in terms of how it's structured. I like the layered approach, right? And maybe you use these questions to give yourself guidance so that you can have a more tangible, focus group. And then that focus group builds upon, a set of principles to kind of work on. And then there are action plans behind that. And then there's some sort of regular update that you can give this group, whoever it may be, because otherwise they feel like they're just talking the talk.
I think that you want to be able to report things out from focus groups on a collective basis. I mean, I think that people will, to your point, Jay, they don't want to come just for show, right? They want to come, they want to be intentional about what feedback they give us, the information they're willing to share, they're willing to expose themselves. And they need to trust that we're going to do something with it, right? And if we can't make promises, but if at a minimum, we can confirm that the collective information will be gathered and shared out. So we could sort of have a state of the union report.
Their time, we're taking their time. And if you want to feel like your time is well spent
Right,
and it's valuable,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, because they've made the effort to do it. And you want to know that your contributions are going to go somewhere. What's the impact of it?
Does anybody know if the lived experiences project is still active?
I mean, it's,
The answer is the website's there.
right.
They're getting a very occasional submission, is my understanding, but they're not able to invest time in it right now.
Because the resiliency network is kind of taking a lot of that.
Right. But it is available. And I think when we think about if we were to create, a webpage that had these opportunities for people to provide feedback, right? That it could still be one of the opportunities, because if something comes in, it could be flagged still for someone for follow-up. But that data isn't being consolidated and fed back out kind of as a body right now.
Can I ask a quick question? Have we considered having students also be part of this group or reach out to them? Because I'm thinking of the advocacy the thing that happened here that you and I came to a couple of weeks ago, where there were students that were talking about advocacy and had done research. And I grabbed a lot of their information because I want them to talk to the Climate Action Plan group. There were a lot about environmental. There was one about affordable housing, so I'm going to try to have her come speak. So I'm like, this is how you make impact, right? So I know that could there be something related to the schools with the students that where they also become champions of this and have so that we can have that demographic, figure out how to communicate to their peers?
From like the civic showcase that Saturday?
Yeah,
the
Okay,
civic
okay.
showcase.
There were some that were really
Oh,
impassioned
yeah.
and
Very much. so.
and could really help us push through.
I think that's a conversation with Tom Denton. I feel like he had in League of Women Voters. Were behind a lot of that. I feel like Tom was there. And then I know the executive director for the Black and Latino Caucus was the kind of kickoff. He was there. I got a chance to meet him. And
Yeah.
he seems like a really interesting person.
But this is the future of Needham, right? Or
Mhm.
so
They
how
can
do we-
afford to live.
Well, if you talk to real coalition.
I think that that's now part of I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's part of the state law now, or at least a curriculum component that students need to do this kind of a civics project. So I believe that the entire 11th grade.
It was a
did
junior
it.
class, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think some of it was extra credit. I don't know if they actually all had to. I think when I talked to some of them, because I knew some of the kids, it was an extra credit thing as well, but intertwined in the curriculum.
So I have an 11th grade.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It was extra credit to come and be part of the showcase.
Oh, that's what, okay.
Ah.
But they all have to do
But they all
it.
had to do a
I think.
project.
Yeah,
Don't-
okay,
don't
but everyone
take-
had to
don't
do a
take it to the
project.
bank. But I think they should be doing it every year, I think going
Yeah.
forward, but there's an opportunity there for the town to.
And there's the
get
Greater
involved.
Boston project where
And the
they're
Greater
always
Boston.
looking for projects to do, and then that's something that we could hook onto early enough.
Well, they could also take a lead in having some focus groups. themselves.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, we're trying to guess what their demographic is, and how they communicate, but why don't we just ask them the same thing, with the other groups? What makes you comfortable and how to meet and how can you be part of this?
Other thoughts? We're gonna need to kind of distill some of these and make some priorities. But this feels like it's been helpful in surfacing some new ways to think about this group. All right, setting up communication structures to ensure the sustainability and accountability of the initiative. That I actually feel like we have some things
Yeah, I'm
on
not
that.
sure, I'm not sure what that means. Communication to the select board from the committee, is that what that means?
Well, so I think when that question or when that charge was written, it didn't presume that Nuwari stayed forever, right? So it presumed that the town thought about how are we going to sustain this? How are we going to continue to, as I say, inspect what we expect, okay, in terms of maintaining accountability going forward. And I know from the select board's goals that it certainly has maintained every year. We're sitting here now readjusting based on what we've done in the prior year for what the next year's hurdles are going to be for what we want to learn more and figure out how to do better.
And we got funding in our operating budget to, as Katie said, to continue that work eventually for committees as well.
So I think from the town's perspective, we put in some pieces for the staff we've put in some pieces as they relate to boards and committees, and we've got some more work still to go there. You know, is there a guarantee? There's probably not, but I do feel like a lot of the right pieces are in place, and certainly with intent to continue, so.
I do think that if the groups, if the boards or any kind of group doesn't have some directive with accountability, if there's no champion for this, or everyone is in the majority, they don't understand why there's a reason to change. And so there's been pushback on some committees that, well, we're doing the best we can, but we don't think we need to change. And so if there's, what I've been told from some groups is that if there was something that could be consistent for all the groups with some kind of accountability, it would make people think about it differently versus having them choose what to do when it doesn't affect them. They don't want to change anything. Or if they feel threatened that they're going to be taken off of a committee or do something, because they're going to be losing out, they don't want to change anything. So how do we, if you don't have a champion and you don't have any, how do we help those committees see things from a different perspective?
I think it's the same that you're doing with town departments, is you're requiring them to establish some sort of a goal towards equity and to report to account for what their efforts have been on an annual basis.
But you also have to summarize it, right? I mean, I think it's the same as what Katie was saying for the staff, that there are goals for those departments. But there also needs to be a separate list, if you're talking about diversity for the town over, where you can take those departmental or committee achievements and summarize it into a full DEI summary. So it's a combination of both, so that you can see it's happening at the grassroots level, but that there's also a program that's led by the town.
Because it's sort of what I was just saying about the focus groups. It's holding their feet to the fire.
Exactly.
We've asked all of the boards and committees to adopt the vision statement and the mission and to lead. And so now we're saying, okay, what are you going to do about it?
Exactly.
What's your plan? What's your action plan?
And I think we hear from a lot of them, it's like, we need your help to tell us how to take the next step.
Yeah, which is why I think the glossary is important, because I think there does need to be consistent shared language. The definitions may differ. I mean, there are going to be some different definitions and meanings about it for each organization, because it's going to be applied in a different way. But having the shared language is going to be important. And they'll need the guidance on that. So, maybe, some of what we talked about, on our little education group, when we talked about, having the chairs of the boards and committees going through some training.
And I think another piece is there's a difference between sort of the groups that are boards and committees that have staff liaisons that are simply liaisons, or that have department managers. So, you're gonna have a department manager whose goal might be to increase purchasing from minority-owned businesses, and that's really gonna affect the board if there's a board, right? So I think that there's gonna be quicker progress in areas where there's a department manager asking the board to take action based on a townwide DEI goal that person has in his or her review, versus a smaller board that doesn't have staff other than to post meetings and things like that. So I think we need to be mindful of that.
And I think the key is identifying realistically attainable goals, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be within 1 year, we will do X, Y, and Z, right? I think it's creating a plan. It's creating something that they can work towards and sustain over a longer period of time.
And a lot of times it's just gathering the data so you know where to start.
So you know where to start, right?
But I agree. I mean, I think we need to set goals, and this is something we talked about at the planning board meeting last night, is that we need to we were looking at the goals for the select board. He said, we need to set goals for the planning board, goals for equity, goals for environment, goals for looking at zoning, goals for this, because if we don't do that, we're just going to keep on chugging along. Even if we have the best intention, there's no accountability for any of these goals and a schedule to do it. So I think But I think that if the town could think about creating policy in the sense of saying, did you, for procurement in any department, do we have goals for minorities or disadvantaged businesses or whatever per thing? And then it's globally, whatever, 5%, 10%, 15, whatever it is. Then when there's an RFP that goes out for PPBC or an RFP that goes out for planning board, it's even throughout. Like we have goals for the town to kind of diversify the people that are applying. And that gives, because otherwise the majority or the larger firms and the more established firms get all the work and the minority don't have a chance. And so at least to get in, and then once you get in, you have to prove yourself and you do, but it's just getting in because it's all quals based and it's all, all public procurement. So there's the procurement piece, there's the board. Do we have a diverse board and profession and like all these different things? That way, it's just kind of global and it's a goal for the town to make sure that we're at least cognizant. If you don't, we're trying, but we didn't get any applicants this time. So then that gives a red flag to maybe some initiatives that have to happen to increase that.
I think one of the things that frustrates me with the pushback about being told exactly what to do and how to do it is by adopting the goals and looking at them. Say you're interviewing people to come in, make bids on something, and we talk about DEI or being equitable and things like that. And if you know that everybody that you've had in for a bid or that you're taking from have all been majority white owned or something like that, I feel like that you don't have to be told to know this is where you're lacking. I just feel like in some of the things and the guidances that are already in our vision statement, our guiding principles, to have to be told exactly how to do those things is it's a frustrating thing to hear, even though I understand they want direction. But some of the things, even if you're of the majority, have not thought about this, if you read it and you've adopted this, when you're making decisions or doing things, I don't think it's that hard to think about, oh, well, I haven't done that, even though I said that we are going to adopt this. So I know what we're trying to do, and I love that we're trying to do that, but some of the things are definitely more things that should not have to be so thought out and so explained and directionally based, where it should be a common sense thing.
But it's not.
It's
That's
not,
what-
I know,
and I'll tell you-
I know.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
I'll be over here.
I'd like to be kumbaya, but it doesn't work. Yeah.
I like what you're saying. I think you need concrete because
Yeah, I know.
generally in history says the majority will forget.
Oh, no.
Because it doesn't affect you at all and you don't see how it affects us in general.
I was trying to pick up the meeting a little bit. I figured wake everybody up.
Thanks, Marcus.
I'm here for the people.
I actually like the idea of concrete.
Does everybody notice Marcus's sweatshirt?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, what are we gonna get done?
So here's the thing, Marcus, the fact of the matter is that the whole reason for our initiative is not to draw people in who understand where we're coming from
Correct.
and what we're
Yeah.
trying to do.
Correct.
They're not people who are gonna be sitting in the room drilling down on the value and mission statement and guiding principles that we noodled through and fought through, right?
Yeah.
As diverse a group as we are, it was not an easy task for us to do those guiding
No.
principles. We had lots of debate and discussion. It was healthy, but the goal is to bring those people in and give them a sweatshirt that says, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to talk about this.
Yeah.
So I'm
I like
having,
the idea of concrete.
Oh, no, I like it too.
Concrete,
I was just
'cause,
putting that
like,
out there.
I feel like you fake it till you make it. So if you're forced to do it for a little while and hopefully you're getting the
Then it
learning
becomes
behind
normal.
it,
Yeah.
then eventually you'll be like, now I understand
Routine.
why it would be nice to have 5% or 10% of, what I'm saying out to, for minority owned businesses or to hide, so I like the idea of that.
and I don't mean to take, but I've been working with the state, with DCAM, with Massport, with MassDOT, all of the groups through when I was president of the BSA. All of the procurement now for BPDA, the City of Boston, everything has all the numbers. I have all of the text that PPBC can use to say, we want this to be equitable. These are the goals, blah, blah, blah. And there's accountability. And we've been working on it for a long time, not only and people won't get projects unless they have it. And now they know. It's kind of like what accessibility was many years ago. Now it's ingrained in everything, universal design, right? We do the same thing with environmental and we do the same thing with equity right now. They're the hot two topics, and it's becoming mainstream. And then what we're trying to do is find all of these BIPOC firms and say, introduce them. So we're having
Right.
introductions
Get
to
them
say,
into the
this is
mix.
it. We're not trying to force you to work with these people, but look at all these amazing people you didn't even know existed.
that are
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
the same amount of work.
So that's important. We talked about this committee chair training, and one of these things makes me wonder, Kate, so I'll offer it for you to think about. When we do that, should we do it with the staff members as well? Maybe there's value in having them both there together.
I mean, there's a goal right there for you to ask the staff how we could incent DEI efforts through procurement. I mean, there's a lot of laws, but if it's a goal of yours to find that out, we can figure that out over the next year. You know what I mean? I think
Okay.
that's what set it. Katie and I started this process 2 years ago with the president of, what bank was it?
Eastern Bank.
Eastern Bank, and he's like, follow the money. This is the first thing he said. Where's your money going? And we've been thinking about it ever since. It's the same.
Well, and I think it's important, part of this discussion, right, is asking the questions for all these transactions, asking the questions. So one of the things that I learned at Wellesley is, for example, Suffolk in the most recent bids for us came and said, okay, we know that we're not meeting your DEI goals, but in fact, we're going with them because of the criticality of the project, okay? But we are committing to do X, Y, Z with our subcontractors so that we're bringing in some minority and women-owned businesses as our subcontractors, and we're going to commit to do X in that, even though we didn't do that last time we did a contract with you. So I think if you make the point often enough, we'll get the firms that we're working with starting to think differently as well about how they put their workforce together. And it starts to become more mainstream, but it takes
also-
everybody asking
Yeah.
every time.
They're also getting used to it because all of their projects in Boston require them. So now they've established relationships. So it's getting easier and they're not going to give you as much pushback. So this is kind of the thing that we should be doing here as well.
Most of our purchasing is, concrete pipe. I mean, and like there's one company that makes, so some of these things are very complicated. And if the board wants to go this way, which is a lot of merit to it, the board has to speak because we're gonna, in some cases, Dave will tell you we'll pay more, right? And that has to be the decision. It's not necessarily true in the professional services space for PPC, I don't think, because we're just opening access, but it could be when you open it up for certain goods and services.
But for architects, everyone that does the type of work, public projects, they're all doing it for every entity, but Needham probably, for whatever towns don't require it. They're doing it for all the DCAM projects. They're all doing it for, City of Boston, everywhere. So it's not anything, it's not anything new.
We're not
They're used
recreating
to
the
it.
wheel.
The contractors
yeah,
for big
for
projects,
professional
yes.
services, I
For
mean.
tiny projects, it's harder to get. So you get a pool of people and then you do your best, right? But for like all the major contractors that do work here, Consigli, all of them, they do this for every entity right now. And so we're not reinventing the wheel and they're creating different, opportunities for different groups. Suffolk is doing, I'm working with Suffolk on 4 projects. One of them is Elaine Construction, is a woman.
Right. we use
So
Elaine all the
Elaine
time.
comes in
Yeah.
and is doing the pavilion that we're doing versus Suffolk doing
We
the big
probably
lab building.
introduced them to Elaine at Wellesley,
Lisa
because
Wexler?
Elaine's done work
Yeah.
for us for a long time, yeah. So, but I think that question, so we should bring that back to the select board. How can we think about something that concrete being part of the goals that we define for this
And we're
year?
asking all the departments, like, what do you do other than buy, right?
Yeah,
You enroll people in programs. And that is a critical one that particularly a lot of Katie's team are looking at is how do we, look at that enrollment? What services are we providing directly and how can we do that? So it's like, what else do we do that we can establish some of these standards
for. So I think this question about setting up communication structures to ensure the sustainability, I guess the question for the committee is, I don't know that there's a final answer there. I feel like it's an ongoing process. All of this will be sort of ongoing. And the question is, to what degree does it get more and more to be like breathing as part of people's process? All right, as opposed to now where people are having to say, oh, I need to think about that because I didn't think about it that way before. So that's kind
where we are.
And that's an organic process.
It takes time.
It takes time. You know, I think, you know, it does have to be concrete, but it takes time because it also needs the context. And one of the things I was going to say earlier about any of the communications, any of the outreach, if it's the focus groups or the discussions with departments and boards, is that people also need to feel safe to be talking about it. And I think that's, you know, why it's going to have to be very intentional effort to design those.
We had a charge related to discussing and prioritizing other recommendations that had been submitted to the select board. That certainly was something that we did, and actually going through that list, I can see a lot of them have happened or are ongoing. We can, certainly the things that relate to community, quite a few of them have been already completed, or the general things. Because they were set specifically as goals by this group or specifically as goals by the select board to get accomplished. And a number of them are things that will be, continue to be ongoing. I didn't go through all the schools items. I feel like that's one area where we haven't really come back. We've kind of left the schools to do the real coalition. And haven't looked at where that stands. So I don't know what progress was made in schools this year. We've had a lot of focus from the select board on the policing issues, and I'm grateful to everybody on the committee who's participated in some of those conversations that I think have been helpful the second half of the year.
Will we get a chance to go back and sort of review the 3 sessions and reflect on them and see what we learned from those 3 sessions and how we can do this better and what outcomes, and would there be an opportunity for that?
I'm happy to set it up. I had a hard time getting the group all on the same.
Oh, I
page.
see. Okay. So
But
we're working on that.
my last doodle failed, so I will try again if you're telling me that you want a meeting.
Oh,
Because I do think it would be good to close it out, because we worked for a year.
yeah.
So I think it would be great to close it out. So I
And
will.
reflect and see what we learned from that process.
Yes, I will.
And for anybody who wasn't there, the answer is they're all videoed, and they were 3 actually really excellent sessions. So, yeah. And I'm grateful to the police for joining us in that effort. A number of the housing things are all in process now with the work that is going on with Natasha and the planning board.
But can I add something? Even with me being on that board, with us having so many different things going on, Marianne came to a community meeting for a project and said, do you have, to a big project, do you have any of these equity goals? I'm like, I had it written down, I didn't bring it up. If I had my checklist, I would have done it, because that's in my mind, but I also had like a million other questions for the community. So even people that are in this committee sometimes need a double check. So I just want to make sure that I wasn't doing my job, you know.
You had a different hat on that night.
But right, but
So you
it
wanna
should
make
be
it
the
part of
same
the
hat,
hat.
right? So it's
So when the select board did write their letter, we did include that as one of the items in the letter, and
so I
I
think
talked to the
having these
developer about it.
goals, and maybe I'll just, you know, having these goals for the planning board will make us always remember environmental goal, you know, all these different goals, right?
Yeah.
And we're even gonna look at the zoning to see the zoning. A lot of parts of the zoning were designed, you know, or were written in 1950, 1980, is there redlining still in there that we don't know? Like, what, so I think that it's gonna take us some work, but I think if we set these goals, we can do it. And Adam's really excited about starting this, and the whole group. But I think it's really important that I put my Nuari hat on more than I have.
Right, so hopefully people think that's something that we actually accomplished and we'll continue to take a look at, but accomplished. And then making recommendations to the select board about future action. So we had a concrete set of recommendations a year ago. I think we should probably circle back at the end of the evening tonight and say, are there some specific recommendations that we would have based on where we are now? Okay. All right. So here's the next question. Does Nuwari stay working? Do we transition away from Nuwari? Where are we going? Because none of you made a commitment for the rest of your lives to Nuwari. All right. And Katie has certainly tried with some of her doodle and she's like, okay, the people have been doing this for a while. They're starting to get a little bit tired. That's clear to me. So how do we think about transitioning Nuwari, having Nuwari get picked up, how it goes forward? What do people think?
I think thinking about when we have to, or when we're able to go to those committees and boards and speak on behalf of Nuwari, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we still have to be in the working group meeting all the time, because we've done all this framework, we've done all of this over the past 2 years or whatever it's been. It feels like 8 years, but it's only been 2 where we have people that can still be like Nuwari accessible. I think that's a different way to look at it going forward, than having to meet all these different times, because what we're gonna do, we can reconvene to get ready to go discuss that. But then from there, when we're called upon to go to meetings and other boards and talk about this and set up their accountability or the things that we're looking for them to do, we can do that. But to have to continue this for another year or 2, when we have all this stuff in place, now we just need to go see it put in action. Then we can, I feel like, like Avengers Assemble when we need to, but it doesn't have to be.
I think that the important thing that you pulled out is that Nuwari is not the meeting, it's not us, it's the initiative, right? So that's not going away. It's just how do we keep it on the forefront? And I like the Avengers Assemble idea.
I do like that, because I was thinking, what would my ask be? I don't think we want to keep going with Nuwari meetings. I think there's a lot of work to be done and there's plenty of time that it's going to take to go off and make that happen. But I was thinking, I would love the people in this group to think of themselves as like a cabinet. And I would love to get the cabinet together, maybe at least once, sometime maybe in the March timeframe as we're headed toward town meeting, to kind of take stock of where we are and be able to report to the town about what we've done and how we're thinking about things. But I feel like there's a kind of advisory role that's
Nuwari
different.
ambassadors.
Nuwari ambassadors. Yeah, Nuwari, the Avengers. So, I like the Avengers. You could definitely do something with that. But I mean, I think that level of, could we commit to something just to get together to be that sounding board and to take stock of where we are?
I think you become an advisory council of some kind, right? And it's an advisory council that can help with the meetings and the focus groups, or to be a resource on a particular project, or, to provide feedback to the select board or to town administration about some action plan that is being considered. We've all come from different backgrounds and experiences, and we're in different places in terms of our professional and personal lives and what we can contribute. So, and we know this stuff, right? Because we came up with it. But I don't know that we're a working group so much more, because I think we've done the work we were asked to do.
But I would argue that if you disband and just become advisory, there's no accountability, right? This forces us to talk about this again. So is there any way that we could help set goals for the town, or whatever the goals are, and some accountability, and then be advisors, so that there's at least a structure that's created that's more tangible than just aspirational?
I like the idea,
Okay.
the idea of reducing the frequency of meetings to once a year or twice a year. I think that would be necessary. And I think what's important about this group is it's a very diverse group. I don't think there is a similar group like this. Even NRN isn't quite like this in terms of the various points of views that we get. So I think once a year, coming together, checking what we have done, where we are in a critical way, is
And talking about future goals,
and
maybe. I would
talking
want to do all of
about
that.
future goals. But that I think is necessary, because I don't know who else is going to do that in it.
So who's gonna be responsible for seeing this work done after we select? The select board?
They don't have enough things to do.
Not even close. We can always do more. I'm just saying, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Katie. I was like, I said, yeah, we're great. I was like, but
But
just
it
trying to
means
add
that the
more to the
select
pie.
Yeah, but that's,
Yeah,
that's a
It
good
means
question.
that
I think
the
these
town
goals are
managers-
fundamental to the select board's goals already. I mean, there's no question.
But the committees are also responsible for it too, right? I mean, I think if you talk about, if I think about your point a little bit more, right, when you say who's gonna put together the scorecard, who's gonna establish the goals, I've always been apprehensive about telling a particular committee what to do. So I think our work in terms of creating a framework is done, and it's more over are you where you need to be, or how are you moving it along? So to be able to meet, once a year or something along that lines, or even do a checkpoint every now and then, just to see which committees are actually picking up the ball and rolling, because I know there are some committees that haven't. So, our ability to be able to do that is crucial. I think being able to go deep into the trenches unless you're on a particular committee is a little bit more challenging, at least for me. So I almost see that they've got to pick the ball up, run with it, and really hold them accountable for sending back some of those objectives that we've kind of put out.
I think it should be
Go ahead,
intertwined
please.
within the chairs of the committee. I think that should be part of the roles and responsibilities, to be a part of the people that are holding their groups accountable as the chairs change, which that's going to happen, but that's part of the roles and the accountability. Besides the select board, I feel like those chairs and vice chairs, they have to be responsible for carrying the brunt of this as well. So it's not just on the select board to make sure you're doing this. I feel like, how do we intertwine that? How do we make that a part of the fabric of what the chairs are doing with their committee? And then they check back with us for us checking back in to talk about these things have been done in this way. And if they're not, that falls on you. And maybe you leading this and being a chair is something that you shouldn't be if you can't keep up with these things.
I think chairs do need to be mindful about their work. I'm gonna come back to that, but Jen.
Jen, sorry.
I was gonna suggest, could we ask the committee chairs to say, set their one equity goal by, October 1, and somehow transmit those to the Nuwari group, whether we meet in person or just read them out, read them on our own, but then maybe set up a time in the spring where we come back to look at those goals and maybe invite those committee members to come in and talk about what their progress is, and have some kind of engagement process where we can let the committee leaders know, in September, October, as they're making these goals, we're here as a resource for you. Set this goal, and then we're gonna hold you to talk about it again, at least in the spring. And I want to say accountability, realizing that some people may be able to meet whatever goal, maybe it was unrealistic, maybe other things got in the way, but at least that there is a commitment by the committees through their leadership to working towards attaining this goal. And at least they know they're gonna have to speak about it at some point. So maybe it might push them to really focus in on finding an achievable goal that they can do.
Is it
I like
possible
to-
that we can give them structured goals though, maybe? Like
we
say,
need to.
like,
I know you don't want it, but I'm gonna tell you
No,
why.
but I'm just saying, like, say, these are the 5 or 10 kind of things we think you can do, like, have 80% of your staff be trained in cultural sensitivity, have, 10% of your employees or your SMAs be from people of color, you know what I mean? Like, so they have like 5 different things, contractors, 5% of your contractors in the next year to be minority or female owned company, you know what I mean? So that way, and it will be catered to what your division is, because not everyone will be able to train their staff. So that's sort of like an easy softball. Like if you can't think of anything else, we want to have 80% of your staff. And then we can give them different sort of places or different people who can come and speak to staff, different training, routines that they can go through. And that way it's sort of like an ideal, like this is really where you want to go. And that way you can give it to the chair and then they can say, okay, I think we can do X, Y, and Z, or we can only do X, or we can, but they can pick from something that we say, these are the kind of things you should concrete that you should be able to do.
So I think we have lots of potential levers for the staff working for the town. I think it's harder for us right now with the boards and committees. But I think the things that we can do for boards and committees, Jen, I support the idea of saying we'd like to know by October 1. I don't think they're going to know in the fall. So I think we need to get through this process of like meeting with them and having some conversation about what the range of possibilities are so they know what they're taking back. So we've got a first year to kind of get through. But hopefully we would get to the point where people then could come back in the subsequent years. And then the other thing is, over the course of a year, the chair and the vice chair of the select board see a lot of chairs of various boards and committees in town. And I think we need to make it a part of our regular conversation with them. Usually we have them coming in for some issue that needs to be discussed, but to engage around this as a part of our regular conversation when they come in and meet with us. They need to know that it's important to us, that it be a priority in their work and in what they're doing. And I think, again, over time, people start to get the message when you always get the same question, you're going to start to be prepared for how you're going to come answer that and be thinking about that.
Marianne, I think a lot of the boards that I've spoken to don't know what to do. And this happens in my field also, you know, we're 50-50 in the schools, we're 17% women. When you get out and there's like 3% BIPOC. And one of the things that people ask when we said, we need equity in our profession is, what do I do? And we're like, well, you need to hire people. How do I do that, right? So I think that there are a lot of people that want to do the right thing. They have no clue how to do it. I mean, even when you walk around town and you see Black Lives Matters, but like, what are you actually doing? They're like, we don't know what to do. We just want to support it, right? So even having like a 3 things saying, do you have equity goals? You know, for your group, do you have equity goals for your procurement? Do you have equity goals for the people that are hired? You know, let's say PPVC, because I was on it, that are hired for these projects. And just those 5 questions makes them think a little bit like, wow, you know, we need to think about these things. And that could get them started to create their own plan. But at least it's just very broad. It brings it up. And then when you meet with them once a year, you're like, so did you look at your equity goals, you know, and where do you guys stand? And sometimes they're like, you know, we tried, but we can't find people or whatever, but at least it gives them something to start from. And then they can take it.
It seems like that most of the policy boards, I think you're onto something. I just think that those 5 things will have to be different because the select board doesn't hire anybody, well, except for me. And they don't,
right,
they don't
if you
buy
hire,
anything.
right, if
You know
you
what I mean? So-
procure, if you, you know.
So, you know, I think that's all gonna get covered on the staff level because the board has said to do that, but that doesn't mean the board shouldn't be looking at all of their policies. Like, everybody can start with gathering data, like what are our policies, you know, and are they,
Yeah.
you know, are they doing anything to prevent meaningful access for people? And, you know, that is one thing you can absolutely start with. So I think that the PVC is an interesting one because they actually,
And planning board, we hire people to
Right.
do work, and other groups hire consultants to do work, and then when, you know, when we have developers come in, do we have a goal for them? You know, you need to hire consultants that are, and they're there because we're, you know, working on, we're not inventing something here. I think it's, the structure is there, it's just a matter of what are our goals.
And I love your idea, what you said, what you've done as far as minority and women owned, you know, businesses, like just the introduction, like finding and having
Yeah.
those types of companies and different people that are in the room. Because I think, you know, in Needham, what I've noticed, that loyalty is a big thing in Needham. And that is true. And I love that about Needham. But being loyal, but then also reimagining what that looks like. If we don't venture outside and reimagine the way we've done things, then we're never going to get an opportunity for other businesses that may not have access to a town like this to be in here. So if we don't be a part of introducing more businesses and then people when we're bidding out things, when we're hiring people, and we stay with the same people that we've always used, then we're never going to progress in that way.
And the Supplier Diversity Office for the state has all of this information that of diverse women, you know, minority women, disadvantaged veterans. They have all of it. So we don't have to invent any of it. We just have to figure out what are the goals and how do we want to push it forward.
Kate, I
So-
think the good thing is that, you know, most of the boards and committees will serve departments as well. And so even just saying, you know, well, we're gonna be partnering with this department to, you know, guide them to achieve their departmental goal, and this is how we can support them. you know, the work that we can do to, I don't know, I mean, I don't, I think it can be in partnership too. It doesn't have to be a standalone goal.
Well, and then we have committees, historic committee, library, you know, that have different kinds of missions. The library has been quite active in lectures and bringing in authors that are intended to
Reviewing the
educate,
collection.
right, reviewing the collection, all those kinds of issues. So I do feel like they've adopted, you know, the approach that we're asking, and are thinking about their work in that front. You know, I had a conversation with the Historic Commission about how they might be able to provide some lectures and education to the town similarly around the issues that they're particularly focused on. And they were engaged in that discussion, but there's a range certainly of committees, and it's not all as easy. So some of them do have to think a little bit harder to figure out exactly what it means to their work. But even if the question that we generically asked everybody is, you know, how is your audience diversifying? How are the people you're reaching broadening? And they thought about that as an output of some of their work that would have them thinking differently. So whether it's in how their outreach works or whatever it might be, so.
Is the type of training that has started for the staff, is that something that could be given to the committees and boards at some point?
We very much have had it in mind to see it through the staff and see if it is. We hope that it is, right? Because I think it is transferable, goal setting and such, but I don't know yet.
So you're probably not going to finish that training before the end of the year? I'm guessing.
We have 4 more sessions, right? And
3
It's gonna
more.
go into 23 for the staff. I mean, I think we might not have to complete all 5 for us to have a sense of, is this really transferable to boards and committees? But we certainly need more than just the one that we've had so far. So it's just very foundation setting.
So I know from many trainings that I've done, I think being so spread out, what are we gonna do in those gaps to make sure that retention rate or that, you know what I mean? Like, because if it's that spread out, it's easy to forget, you know, there's not some type of something, whether it's accountability, whether it's like a recap, you know, halfway in between to get ready for the next meeting. But I feel like something needs to be in place there because a lot is gonna get lost if we're not gonna be done until next spring. But just something to think about, because I can imagine people with the best intentions, you know, they're really excited about this, and then a month and a half from now, how much are they really gonna remember from that? And the next one's not for 4 months. I'm just thinking out loud, then are we doing a disservice in doing this? Not for no reason, but I hope people get things that they're gonna keep and stay within their heads, but I just don't feel like it'll be as impactful as we want it to be if there's that much time in between and just scheduling. I understand that it's difficult, but that's gotta be somewhere in there. I imagine, just because I can't imagine someone retaining all that. You know, it's beautiful and as well done as it was, and the conversations were great. What's the follow-up in between to get us ready for the next thing?
But that's why I like Jen's idea. I mean, if you have a time bound, right? I know that some people need help, but there may be more than others.
Most,
But if you give them an activity to go off on their own and see what they come up with, and we talk about what's the role of this committee, right? To be able to look at that and give them feedback. You don't have to wait for the training to happen in order for that to happen, in order for this to move forward. You can almost say, let's assess where you are. And then, you know, folks on this committee or everybody collectively can get what their goals are and give feedback. And maybe collectively as Nuwari, we send comments back to them to say, well, you know, you're not thinking out of the box far enough. There are other areas that you could be looking at, but to at least give them something short term to kind of put something out on the table I think it pushes the bar a little bit forward so that you're not in this waiting game of, well, I'm gonna wait for training to come and then I'm gonna do, something more specific to me. It almost gets them to almost go out and do their research on their own right now and figure out what's within their area and then come back with something a little bit more
We could
tangible.
come up with sort of a standard question that would challenge people to start
Exactly.
thinking, that we could maybe throw out to the board. That makes sense. I
Yeah,
think we can come up with
Yeah.
something. I know we've got some models that have done a lot of work that we could look at.
I'm also thinking it might be useful for them to know what their department or staff that they're affiliated with, like what their goal ends up being when those goals are set, that would be one of the inputs to their thinking.
So
But
I like-
then it feels like we would be waiting until later to do some kind of training. Maybe we just do an informal session in the fall and just say, we're gonna be available as a resource at this time. If you want to come in and have a conversation, we'll be there. Could do that.
But I like the idea, and asking people to just start, and for people who really don't feel like they can do it for whatever reason, right? Offering a connection with someone who could sit with them for half an hour or an hour and sort of jumpstart the process for them, walk them through it or talk them through it.
I think that's a great idea,
Yeah.
because I think there are some people that are paralyzed by it. They don't know what to do. They want to do something. They think they're doing the right thing and they don't understand. So that there could be a guide, some guidance, if you need guidance and you want some support, this is,
I think about it as office hours almost.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be drop-in, but just for the people who need it. So you get, some number going forward and then some number need a little bit more support, and then probably some number will need a lot of support.
That's relationship building.
Yeah.
Between
And then
whoever doing
that's-
that with them, and that's another, avenue into, what they're doing in the committee, and then to be able to rely on another person that may be able to give that support in a way that is tangible, in a way that helps them retain and helps them educate.
You also have the other committees too that you think about. I mean, the best example is for one committee leader to lean upon another one and see what they're doing. So I think if everybody's doing it all at the same time, somebody that's a little bit weaker can team up with someone that's stronger and they can push them to be better.
It may also confirm the kind of training they need.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, whenever I develop a training program, I'm always doing an assessment first. You want to know where's the need?
and what level.
What's the need, what are the goals? What's the best way to deliver the information and the knowledge? What's the best way for them to learn to retain the knowledge and use it? Because that's ultimately what we want to do with the training, is to make sure that they're able to apply it to the goals and to do the work.
Yeah, because all you can do is ask.
All you can do is ask. That's right.
I
But if
like-
you
I
don't
like the
ask, you
idea
don't
they're all
get,
doing
for
the same
sure.
time. It's like their homework.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come up with some ideas.
Right, and I do think we have some core sets of some questions that we can kind of start to lay out.
Start with the fourth grade. You
Start with
always
the
tell
fourth.
me.
And Kate, you sent this out, this toolkit, and I printed it. I think this is excellent. I'm gonna share it with a couple of the groups that I'm with. I'm even gonna, well, I still get the PPBC meeting notes, so I'm just gonna send it
They
to
never
them.
take anything.
So I'm gonna send it to all of them because I think that this is really just helpful in
Yeah.
general. If anyone is interested, it's there. And it's a toolkit, so I don't know. I'm gonna look through it, but.
Would it be realistic to maybe set an event, an hour and a half long event for all of the committee and board chairs to hear from somebody about why it's important to set DEI goals, and maybe that could be a place where you could paint some of the broad strokes about how to kind of get started? Because I feel like, if you had, you said 30 people in the room with somebody like Gary Bailey or with Quentin Williams who came to speak, and everybody kind of gets that, like, oh, this is important and it's important to you and now it's important to me, and like that kind of camaraderie to, I don't know, energize them and make it feel less scary, I guess, to like put something on paper. I don't know how, if we have some funding that we can hire somebody to come and do something like that.
I think that's a really good idea because when they hear it from us, if they have a different type of relationship with us or feel like, oh, she's trying to push this agenda, whereas it comes from someone who is not affiliated to the town. And it's, I feel like it gives a different form of education and makes them understand that this isn't an agenda of a group. We've heard, it's a political agenda is what I've heard. You've heard it too. And so we don't want it to be that, and we want it to be,
I just want to say to anybody else who gets told it's a political agenda, you can pull out our document and you just start to read, and then you read the first phrase and you say, does that sound political? And then you read the next phrase and you say, does that sound political?
Yeah, they'll say
It's
well, I was lucky to
Well, if you
have,
think about it-
I was lucky to have Mary Ann with me, who's very calm and thoughtful. I was like,
We don't have time.
what? What are you talking about? And then Mary Ann's like, I'm gonna open this up and da-da-da. I was like, thank God she is in this room because I was gonna lose it. I'm like, it's not political, it's it's
Right.
equitable. It's
Right.
equitable.
Right, so.
You've always been in the room for lack of equity issues, then you don't see it as equitable because you feel like
You
it's
don't
taking away from
know.
that.
You don't have a lived experience, you don't understand the mission, you don't understand it.
Right,
And
Can I
you're,
ask a priority question?
yeah.
So I know I stepped out, but I'm really struck by this great idea of having some focus groups where we might ask people from our main race equity page is, do you feel welcome? And what is it that is keeping you from accessing town services? Like to try to ask people where those pain points are. That's probably going to take a whole year to pull off. Is that before the board and committee setting goals idea? I mean, I think these are two huge initiatives. With
Can
pretty
we
much
do
just
them at this,
taking,
not maybe at the same time? Can we do them like, so it doesn't take 3 years from now? Can we kind of stagger it so we can kind of start them within? Yeah, and it's gonna be a heavy lift. Yeah, I get it. And you have so many.
Katie
heavy
and I are
lifts.
not going to be able to.
There's no way.
Ask people to come to these meetings, and
Right,
this is going to be
right.
on you.
Yeah,
Be
okay.
fair, right? So,
So I think the boards and committees, we can take on. Right, I think that's on us and
Mhm.
we'll take that on. And I think we have some other colleagues who would be with us to help on that.
For
So, so I think prioritized for you would be like the focus group or the sticky notes. How can we figure out how to make that actionable?
what is it we want to find out, though? I mean, if we're trying to find out whether there are policies and procedures that prevent meaningful access to people because of race, or because people aren't interacting with the town because of issues of race.
If we find out.
That's not a
oh,
sticky board at a, that's like 6 people in a room with maybe a facilitator, I would think.
I don't know about that. I think there may be a place for sticky notes there. I think you might be surprised what would come back.
I guess if we're trying to interact with the BIPOC community directly,
The
There's
school also did some
450
focus
people.
groups when the equity audit was done back in like 2018, 2017. Maybe they have some framework that they started with to set up those focus groups, because what they had was an independent consultant who came in and invited people to come and talk with her.
totally agree with parents who were known to them from the school, right? I mean, for the most part, also maybe community members, I don't know. That's in
I mean,
teachers.
it was definitely an intentional asks, I believe, but
I'm just saying by sheer numbers, people who are gonna come vote in this room for precinct I and J are gonna be 86% white. So that's who's gonna.
Well, so then we get back to, is there a way that we can use Marcus's list?
But that's gonna require your list. That's
Oh,
all.
yeah, oh, yeah, use my list. I think access.
And your list of having a lot of meetings and helping.
Yes, hey, if that's what it takes, I feel like if I can do these interviews and things I've been doing these last few weeks, I can do a lot of
That's
meetings,
fair.
Zoom or in person. I would love to have real conversations in rooms with people in the BIPOC community to really feel that. But it's, as far as access, if Zoom works for them, I'm gonna make time. Like this next year is gonna be about really taking that next step in how we're engaging the community.
You maybe
Just
could
gotta
hire
make time.
like Lisa to help or something, So I guess the next thing is also Do you want us to come up with a series of questions that might be tackled based on the kinds of things you said and then send it around to everybody just for their feedback?
And it's something that we want to put in the mailer? Is this something like questions or do you mean,
Questions that you would ask in a focus group.
okay,
Yeah. What are you trying to find out?
Mhm.
And then, like Vivian said, summarize it all together.
Jay was saying he
Here.
really wanted to help me with that if I had to do that. Jay was like, I
I'll
was like,
stand
I don't know.
outside Trader Joe's. Volunteer to do that for one.
Stand outside French
You guys
press.
are-
Right.
Marcus, I'll help you and Jay.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll
all right.
help you, and I'll help you
I
too.
have facilitated a lot, and so
Yeah.
I'm happy to help facilitate a focus group.
Yeah, it'll be teamwork.
You
It'll
know,
be
I
teamwork
think-
for
I
sure.
think- I think it's something that you have to throw out there for people, and, you know, to your point, all you can do is ask,
Right.
please come.
And I feel like
Please attend.
that, and then I feel like maybe the first feeler of the mailer we put out is just for welcoming people in to communicate, to let us know that they're there. You know, to like,
Mhm.
what have you felt since you've been here? And then we can try to establish
Could
a
even send
date
it, yeah.
or a focus group or something after that. But we got to get people to answer the call that they want to be talked to, that they want to be in the room, that they want to be welcome. We can reach out and do that. And then say we reach out to 400 families and hear back from 10. Do we go knock on doors? It's like, do we go like actually go and talk to people and be in communities and walk?
But I think
And, like-
it's putting it out to the mailing list, and then it's also asking all of the different groups in town
That are already
to reach
established.
out to their
Yeah.
membership, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the network, the Resilience Network
It's
has
got-
done a lot of work around trying to get as many
Engage.
different voices at the table, right, too? So that might be another,
Oh, that'll be
Well, avenue
huge,
to
but now
tap.
we have that, those 30 something or 40 people that are part of that, they're from all different parts of this town and access points to different communities and subsets of this town, I think absolutely. But yeah, first thing, so I'll be in touch with you about just how to access the data from the website and how do we, but that's a whole nother conversation.
So I just wanted to show you, this is what we did for UMass Boston, welcome and inclusive. So we basically we made a plan, said, where do you feel welcome and inclusive on campus? You could say, where do you feel welcome and inclusive in Needham? We gave each group had a different color. So the students were red, the grad students were blue, the staff, and then we gave them a dot and like, put in there where you feel inclusive. And so I have all of this. I could share it with everyone. You know, just as a different way of doing it, where people, it's not, they're not filling out huge forms or anything.
It's simple data.
It's simple data, and so there was welcome, and there are different things, and I can health and wellness, you know, all different types that we asked. One big change, so that was, you know, if you could do one big change, what would you do? And so and then everybody put tons of Post-its, and you could tell by like the demographics, who were students, who were staff, who were alum. So it's super simple. I mean, we do graphics all the time. I could just put 4 boards together if you know, if we're going to Trader Joe's, but I mean, it's just, I think there are simple ways of doing it that are super effective, that in addition to a lot of other tools. Did I just say that I was
Can
gonna
we
do
do it in
something?
time?
No,
not
yet.
I did hear if we need boards who are coming to you, yeah, that's what I took away from that.
Is the street fair feasible?
I do think it's feasible, yeah.
You have 4 boards, and then you have someone standing there
I don't
going,
know if
this
we'll
will
have
take
one.
2 minutes. Do you live in
we don't
Needham or
have a
not? You
time.
get a
Right.
different color, write it up. And then they
Okay.
leave, it doesn't have their name on it, it doesn't have anything, but it tells you the demographic. It tells you, are you BIPOC, right? So if you're a resident in Needham, that's BIPOC, if you're non-BIPOC, if you're, you know, and then you have 4 different colors, and there are a couple of us handing it out, and we get full, you know, feedback. I think the Trader Joe's area, a lot of people that buy international foods and stuff go, so I think that's why I'm saying like, that's an area
I was
where
gonna
you
say
would,
our students from the college go there.
it's
yeah.
an area where you're gonna get a lot of, but, right, so we'd still wanna hear from the students, even though they're in Wellesley. Are you, you know, because
Where is the street fair gonna be on Green?
I assume it's in October, so I assume we'll be done.
Will be done on the common.
I think they're buying for greens.
For the fall.
But we certainly could do something then.
I think you get a different demographic at the street fair than you will outside.
Then
Trader
you're
Joe's.
outside Trader Joe's, I think that's
Mhm.
true. I would
It's all the
actually,
way back to Trader Joe's.
But you can make the same boards and then just kind of just,
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
put them in throughout the year,
Yes,
you know?
just get good pictures.
I actually like
You can
that
put them in the library
question.
too.
Where do you feel is welcome and inclusive?
'Cause you have
And I would almost, you know, thinking about parts of town, places, town buildings. You know, if somebody decides that some place is either perfect or not what they like at all, gets no votes, I mean, we're gonna learn something from that.
Where do you
So,
feel unwelcome, right? So
Yeah.
where do you feel welcome, most welcome, where do you feel unwelcome?
Yeah,
Well, and you can do things like make sure on the big map, you've got the schools, you've got the library.
the
You've
library,
got the community center.
yeah.
Well,
Your
that's
park
what,
and rec.
that's what came out of here.
Town
Campus
hall.
center, library, I mean, it's textbook. I mean, it's incredible where people feel comfortable in places that feel safe to them. Where they're not gonna,
Because if this is a focus on town services, that's why that kind of a map would be, that's the data that would be important.
The most important thing is, what do we want to find out?
right,
Yeah, if you send a questionnaire, it would be great. Propose questions.
Okay.
and this group is an advisory group, I think will be better than if we meet all the time, you know, you'll have more
We'll have to keep
focus.
it constituted if it's gonna meet informally, if formally, but that's fine.
Mary Ann's house for dinner that we've been trying to do for 2 years.
You have a
I'm not gonna
deck.
let that
I
go.
have a deck, we
I'm
can do
happy to
that,
offer a
we can do
backyard.
that.
All right, see, I'm
Yeah.
going anywhere. I won't host, but I'll go anywhere. I'll tell you that.
I'll-
I'll bring food. I'll bring food. Free food, but I can bring, a couple dollars. I'm not gonna cook anything, but I'll be there.
I did not have time
I'm
to bake
happy
for
to-
tonight, I thought about that,
We
yeah.
can seat everybody, so.
All
So,
right, you're off the hook. It is. Let's do it.
all right. Okay. What other business do we have for tonight? What are people thinking? So we had this,
thank
the
you
last
all for
question
your
was
work.
the one about training plan for boards and committees. But I'm feeling like that needs to be a later discussion. We're gonna do something sooner,
I'm gonna
just
give them
trying
an
to
easy assignment
bootstrap
to
them
start them thinking.
first
It's
and
the
then
starter
bring
kit.
it back to
Yeah.
us.
Mhm.
The starter kit. How do we, this is
The starter
the.
And I think in that starter kit is what they've signed up for. You know, it's what they've signed, they've agreed to already.
From adopted record or the. yeah,
Some of
the
them, yeah,
Some of them,
Or some,
yeah.
Right?
some of them.
goal.
Okay, by the end of the summer, by Labor Day, we will get you what we said we would get you.
Kate and Katie gonna go knock some
Yeah,
heads.
knock it out. KK all the way, so I wish you would.
Power and courage.
As long as I get to be an Avenger, I'm happy.
Mindset.
We're gonna-
Yeah, change the whole mindset.
I think what came out of this is that we all need T-shirts.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah. You are
That we
in.
wear when we go to this meeting. With our superpowers. Yeah, when I'm at Trader Joe's, I'll have my, everyone, yeah.
And then ask me
The
about.
superpower
with
sweatshirt.
a T-shirt, like, ask me about Newari or
Yeah.
ask me about town
That's me
initiatives or
about being a
something.
Newari
I'm a
Avenger.
So I
Newari
have-
adventure. And they're like, when you walk around town, it's like, talk to me about this. Talk to me about this. I was like, got it.
I have proof that Marcus actually has gone and knocked on somebody's door.
I have no
And
shame in my
engaged, and
game.
it worked.
And it worked.
And now
For Chad.
he's engaged.
For Chad,
Chad.
yes, I
You
remember.
I went to
that.
his house. Yeah, I legit
Because
went
he
to.
wasn't responding.
He wasn't responding. I was like, let me go over and see what he's up to. So I went over there. I
Did you
dropped
knock
off-
on his window because you
No,
watched on
I
TV because
looked-
he didn't get?
I knocked and then I left a note in his mailbox that I was
Okay.
gonna be terrible. And he got back, he reached out, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So he's like, I appreciate, so he took it in a way that maybe somebody wouldn't have.
Yeah,
As
right.
he's like, I appreciate that our community, and feel, where you feel like you can go and reach out to someone in the community and this, and get this response and to become engaged in something that, has expertise, but he was so thankful for it. So it was a different, I know, I was either that or me and the chief are having a conversation. I was like, one or the other. I was like, well, you know what? I'm 1-for-1 right now. So I'm gonna keep it there.
So I have a T-shirt that says, I'm an ombuds, what's your superpower?
Oh.
And I wear it right
Uh,
there. But I mean, I think that this group has been great, and I really appreciate the hard work that Mary Ann and Kate and Katie would put into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of work.
Absolutely.
Well, we're
Extremely
not
grateful.
done.
Tireless. work.
But we have to
Yeah.
acknowledge
That's
success.
why I count
Yeah.
on all of you.
Yeah, a lot has happened these last 2 years. When I just looked at the date of this, March 2021, I'm like, that was that long ago we did that? Like put out this vision statement of guiding principles? That is crazy to me. That it was, more than a year ago that we put out that. But when we started, October of 20?
September,
Yeah.
October,
September.
November. But some of us, when they opened up that meeting to talk about racism in Needham, and I know Toyin and I.
That was in July.
That's why-
That was in July, I remember, because I was
July.
in Vermont, it was
It was like July
2020,
20th.
and we were, and then we got recruited because we spoke up.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
I got
happened.
recruited. I called Matt after that. I was like, Matt, can I talk to you? I know you're on the select board. Can we have a conversation? Because I thought that had a great intention, but that was terrible. And overall, I was like, I was so angry. He's like, well, why don't you get involved? I was like, well, I will. And then that happened and Human Rights Committee happened and this is where I am now. So that sparked all of this. That really changed the game for me. And I'm happy and sad that happened the way that it did, but it got us to where we are now. I think about every action has a reaction.
And I have to tell you that I wrote out what I was gonna say because I wanted it to be concise and kind of powerful, what I was gonna say, and you also spoke that night. And Marcus, I mean, I didn't know you then, so.
Oh, yeah, I also didn't speak. I just called Matt after because
Oh,
I
you
was
just
angry.
called.
I think I was too angry to say anything. I was like, I need to think about this and then talk to him.
But I told my father and he said to me, I said, I'm gonna speak tonight at this thing for my town. I feel very impassioned about this. And he said to me, be careful because you know that there could be repercussions for what you say. And so I know that a lot of people in this town, their parents have never said that to them, right? So
Yeah.
it was eye-opening to me, like, what are you talking about? I
So
just say
that's
it, and he's
real,
like,
yeah.
be careful how you say it, and you say it too, and if it's a safe place, because you don't know how this could impact you and your children and your family.
And if we weren't.
And I still did it, but
Yeah.
I had that in the back of my mind that when he was going through life,
Yes.
he was an airline pilot and he was asked to leave the cockpit by captains when he was starting out because they didn't want a Puerto Rican in the cockpit. So, and he was born in New York. He wasn't even born in, so it was very interesting to me to see my family and how they reacted to some of these things. And he ended up being, proud of the fact that I was speaking up, but he warned me that sometimes these things don't work out, the way that you want them to. So I'll have to tell him about tonight.
And if we didn't have leadership that were about pushing this forward and taking those questions, taking those concerns, taking those realities of things that people in leadership haven't faced or don't know about, then it could have gone a lot different. So the fact that we had people that were in seats that were like, all right, well, yeah, we should be doing this or making this a focus or listening to the perspectives of other people, we would have never gotten to this point. So the fact that we're slowly getting better and working towards a goal and pushing forward, it wouldn't have happened unless we had people that were willing to listen, even if they didn't do a good job listening to understand some of the people on that call.
Well, we all know that there's always work to be done, right?
Yeah, doesn't stop. This is till
There's always.
death do us part. This work, but really, it's a lifelong thing.
Who's the coolest adventure?
I'm dying to know if Marion's keys are still buzzing. No, just
Yeah.
I could still hear them. I was like, that is still happening. When I went out to the bathroom, I was
I may not be
like,
able to get into my car at the
yeah,
end of this,
so I
you
went
know?
around for it, but I was like, that's still, I went out there, I'm like, nope. Nope.
Don't touch them, they're alive. I don't know what
As
it
long
is.
as this video doesn't become a meme. Lauren tries to find sound.
They just stood here and all of a sudden I didn't hear that much. I'm like, they're coming from the water.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, Scarlet Witch, yeah.
Most
She's the
powerful,
most powerful.
yeah.
All right, well, that's
Well, that or
That's
Captain Marvel. That or Captain
Captain
Marvel.
Marvel,
Those are the
yes.
two most
They
powerful.
are
They're
just-
both women. I don't even know.
Yeah, they
Two
are
most
just.
powerful women.
it doesn't
And
get
Thor
any-
would probably be.
They are
We have
powerful.
some people who are very well versed.
And anyone who's not seen it, Top Gun, you have to.
Oh,
see it.
yeah.
I've seen it twice.
I didn't even know.
Did you see the original in the
Oh,
theater?
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, just
Yeah,
watched
some of us
the
are of a certain
original, and I was like.
I watched the original 2 weeks ago, and saw Top Gun this past Thursday. I feel like the original should never be made, because the second one was so much better than the original. It was so, I got goosebumps, I got emotional, I'm like, why am I getting emotional?
Yeah, I got emotional.
Yeah, I'm like,
Oh, see your kid ride. The second time too.
it was so good. It was so good.
I'll see the third time.
I'll go see it again. It was that good. Every moment I was like,
Yeah.
I'm dying to see it.
it's so good. I'm happy you didn't hear any spoilers, so I don't like that. I get really mad when people spoil things.
Yeah, and then you
Okay.
should know that they all actually flew in planes.
Yes,
Like they're
yeah,
small,
that's-
and Tom Cruise can fly a fighter.
Can
He
fly
didn't
it,
do that,
right.
but he can fly one.
Yeah.
And they built a special plane to be able to photograph it. They had
Yeah,
to
so
build a
but they
special
were in a
plane to
plane doing all
photograph
the
it. Yeah,
maneuvers.
doing all that.
For hours, and
It's
the train
awesome.
and all that. It's
To know that they did that, I think that's why I had a greater appreciation. I'm like,
Yeah.
they really did
Did
this.
They really did this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And then pilots review it, and the pilots were all like, that, most of that stuff.
yeah.
That's awesome.
It was good.
Yep, so.
I think
top
there's
of that
another
event.
field trip coming up.
It is top of that
All
event.
right.
That's what we are.
So
If
we're gonna
we-
meet next spring?
We're gonna meet in the spring, and we're gonna be called upon before then, so we'll be
Yes.
looking for
absolutely.
input and feedback. And I am grateful to all of you who, when I said you a note, say, can you talk to me? Can we talk?
Torian will never go to another public meeting.
That's because we're gonna keep them busy. Occupied.
We'll
We'll just
page
page
it. They're on the interweb
Page
now.
it, paging Toyin, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, technically, we need to have a motion to adjourn, so I would welcome one.
I make a motion.
So
to
moved.
adjourn.
And a
I don't think
second.
I've ever done that.
Well,
Yay. All in favor?
I
Any opposed?
hope not.
We're adjourned till the spring,
Thank you.
barring other
Thank
things.
you.
Thank you.
So when we put out the call for Avengers Assemble.